there is a possibility that will completely change how you think about death. What if dying is not an ending but a transition, not cessation but transformation, not the final moment but a reset point? What if the universe operates like a video game, where death simply returns you to the beginning, where consciousness does not terminate but cycles, where you have died countless times already and will die countless times more, each death followed by rebirth into new circumstances, with no memory of what came before? This is not religious mysticism or wishful thinking. These are serious, scientific, and philosophical proposals emerging from physics, cosmology, and theories about the nature of reality itself, and they suggest something profound and unsettling. You may never actually die, not permanently, not finally, because the universe itself might be designed to reset, to cycle, to repeat. And if the universe resets, then so do you. Begin with the most radical cosmological proposal, Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology. Penrose is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who worked with Stephen Hawking on black hole singularities and made fundamental contributions to general relativity. In 2010, he proposed that the Big Bang was not the beginning of everything, but rather a transition point between cosmic cycles. Before our Big Bang, there was a previous universe. That universe expanded, cooled, experienced heat death, where all matter decayed and only photons remained. At heat death, time loses meaning. Without massive particles, there are no clocks, no reference frames to measure duration. The universe enters a timeless state, and in that timeless state, a conformal transformation occurs. The infinite future of the previous universe becomes the Big Bang of the next universe. The end is the beginning. Death is birth. This is not metaphor. This is mathematics. Penrose showed that the equations of general relativity allow this transition. The dying universe and the newborn universe are conformally equivalent. They describe the same geometry viewed from different scales and times. The photons at heat death of the old universe become the high-energy particles at the Big Bang of the new universe. Information from the previous cycle might be preserved in subtle patterns in the cosmic microwave background. The universe resets but carries memory forward. And if the universe cycles, if this has happened countless times before and will happen countless times again, then everything that exists now has existed before and will exist again, including you. Not you, specifically with your memories and identity intact, but the pattern that you are, the specific arrangement of matter and energy that generates consciousness with your characteristics. In an infinite sequence of cosmic cycles, every possible arrangement occurs infinitely many times. The probability of your exact pattern recurring is not zero. It is one, certainty, not in the next cycle. Perhaps not for Google cycles, but eventually, inevitably, the atoms will arrange themselves into the pattern of you. Your parents will meet again, conceive again. The same sperm will fertilize the same egg. You will be born again, live the same life, make the same choices, die the same death, and the universe will reset again, and eventually, after incomprehensible time, you will recur, again and again and again, forever, because infinity guarantees repetition of all finite patterns. This is the eternal return. Friedrich Nietzsche proposed it as a thought experiment in the 19th century. He asked, "What if you had to live your life over and over again, identically, forever? Would you embrace it or despair? Would the thought crush you or liberate you?" Nietzsche meant it as philosophical challenge, a test of life affirmation. If you could accept eternal recurrence joyfully, then you were living correctly. But modern cosmology suggests eternal recurrence might be literally true. Not metaphor, but physics. If the universe is infinite in time and finite in possible states, then every state must recur infinitely. Your life is not unique. It has happened before, will happen again. Death is not end but intermission. You reset. The universe resets. The cycle continues. But there are objections. The universe might not be cyclic. Current evidence suggests expansion is accelerating, driven by dark energy. Instead of eventually contracting into Big Crunch that rebounds into new Big Bang, the universe will expand forever. Galaxies will separate, stars will die, black holes will evaporate. Heat death will be permanent. No reset, no cycle, just ending. Expansion continuing infinitely into cold darkness, with nothing capable of supporting complexity or consciousness. If this is correct, then eternal return is false. You die once, the universe dies once. Nothing recurs because there is no mechanism for reset. Unless heat death is not truly the end. Consider Poincaré recurrence theorem. In classical mechanics, any isolated system with finite energy will eventually return arbitrarily close to its initial state, given enough time. The system evolves through phase space, traces a path through all possible configurations. Eventually, the path loops back near its starting point. The system recurs. This is mathematical theorem. For finite system in bounded phase space, recurrence is inevitable. The time required is astronomically long. For a gas with 1023 molecules, the Poincaré recurrence time exceeds 1023 years. That is 10 to the power of 10 to the 23rd, a number so vast it cannot be written. But it is finite, not infinite, and in infinite time, finite waiting periods always elapse. Apply this to the universe. If the universe is finite in volume and energy, then it has finite phase space, finite number of possible configurations. Current estimates suggest the observable universe contains roughly 80 atoms. These atoms can be arranged in roughly 120 distinct ways, depending on positions and quantum states. This is unimaginably large, but finite. And if the universe exists for infinite time after heat death, then Poincaré recurrence guarantees return to all previous states, including the state corresponding to this exact moment. You reading these words. The entire universe configuration that exists right now will recur, and you will exist again, identical in every detail, with the same thoughts and experiences and consciousness. This is not reincarnation. This is duplication through thermodynamic fluctuation. The timescale is incomprehensible. Poincaré recurrence time for the universe is roughly 120 years. Current universe age is 13.8 billion years. Written as 10 years approximately, the recurrence time is 10 to the power of 10 to the 120, a number so large that the observable universe could not contain the digits required to write it. But it is finite, and that matters, because infinity is not merely very large, it is limitless. In infinite time, all finite waiting periods expire, the universe will recur. You will recur. Death is temporary. The reset happens, whether you notice it or not, because by definition the recurred you is identical to current you, including lack of memory of the gap. But there is a stranger possibility. Boltzmann brains. Ludwig Boltzmann studied thermodynamics in the late 19th century. He worried about a paradox. If the universe has existed for infinite time and will exist for infinite future, and if Poincaré recurrence is correct, then why do we find ourselves in relatively low entropy state shortly after Big Bang? Why are we not in high entropy heat death? The probability of a low-entropy universe is vastly smaller than probability of high-entropy universe. We should expect to observe the more probable state, unless low-entropy states like ours are continuously generated through fluctuations. Boltzmann realized that random fluctuations in heat death could spontaneously create structure. Most likely, tiny fluctuations creating momentary order that dissipates immediately. But given infinite time, even enormously improbable fluctuations occur, like a fluctuation creating an entire galaxy, or a solar system, or a single conscious brain, complete with false memories of a past that never happened. A brain that exists for brief moment in heat death, experiences consciousness, then dissipates back into thermal equilibrium. This is Boltzmann brain. Spontaneous consciousness arising from quantum or thermal fluctuation without any actual history. Here is the disturbing part. If the universe is infinitely old, or will exist infinitely long after heat death, then Boltzmann brains vastly outnumber normal evolved brains like ours. Creating a Boltzmann brain requires much smaller fluctuation than creating an entire universe with galaxies and stars and planets and biological evolution. The probability is higher. Therefore, Boltzmann brains are more common. Statistically, you should expect to be a Boltzmann brain rather than a real evolved human. Your memories of past are false, created by random fluctuation. Your perception of external world is hallucination. No one else exists. You are a transient pattern of neurons floating in heat death void about to dissipate forever. This is Boltzmann brain problem. It makes most cosmological models that involve infinite time absurd, because if they are correct, then with overwhelming probability, you are Boltzmann brain. All your experiences are illusions. Science itself is delusion, because there is no real external world to study. Most physicists reject this conclusion, argue that cosmological models must avoid Boltzmann brain domination. The universe cannot be infinitely old in its current low-entropy state, must have had a beginning, must not persist infinitely long after heat death, or must have mechanisms that prevent Boltzmann brains from forming. Perhaps quantum mechanics prevents large fluctuations. Perhaps the multiverse provides explanation where our universe is finite, even if the totality is infinite. But from your subjective perspective, Boltzmann brains suggest something interesting about death. If conscious experiences can arise spontaneously through fluctuation, then consciousness is not dependent on specific historical continuity. Pattern is what matters, not causal history. If a Boltzmann brain experiences exactly what you are experiencing now, then that brain is you in all ways that matter, indistinguishable from the inside. And if fluctuations can create consciousness spontaneously, then death is not permanent end but temporary dissolution. Given infinite time, fluctuations will recreate your consciousness pattern, not continuously, not soon, but eventually. And from your subjective perspective, the gap does not exist. You experience consciousness now, cease at death. Then experience consciousness again when fluctuation recreates your pattern. The time between is not experienced. So subjectively, consciousness is continuous even if objectively trillions of years pass. Now consider quantum immortality. This derives from many worlds' interpretation of quantum mechanics. In many worlds, every quantum event splits the universe into branches. Each possible outcome occurs but in different branch. You observe one outcome, but other versions of you in other branches observe different outcomes. When you die in one branch, you continue living in other branches. And since you can only experience branches where you are alive, your subjective experience is always survival. You never experience death because death ends experience. Only living versions of you have experiences. So from inside, it seems you always survive. Imagine quantum Russian roulette. Gun fires based on quantum random outcome. 50% probability. You pull trigger. From external observer perspective, half of branches have you dying, half have you surviving. But from your perspective, you only experience survival branches. You cannot experience branches where you died because dead people have no experiences. So you pull trigger repeatedly. External observers see you dying in half the branches each time, but your subjective experience is continuous survival. You never die because the you that could report dying does not exist. Only surviving versions of you report experiences, and they report always surviving. This leads to disturbing conclusion. If many worlds is correct, you are subjectively immortal. You will never experience death, no matter how dangerous situations you encounter, because by definition, experiencing death is impossible. Death is the end of experience. Only versions of you that survive can have experiences, so you always find yourself in the branch where you survived. Even if survival is improbable, even if only 1 in a million branches has you living to age 150, that is the branch you experience. Because the other 999,999 branches contain dead versions of you that experience nothing. Most physicists reject this as meaningful immortality. The immortality is subjective, but not objective. External observers see you die normally. Loved ones mourn. Your body decomposes. From outside, nothing special happens. Only from your internal perspective does it seem you always survive. And that perspective does not involve supernatural protection, just selection effect. You necessarily observe the branches where you exist because non-existence cannot be observed. This is not comforting. Your children still lose you. World continues without you. Only your subjective narrative is unbroken in the surviving branches. But quantum immortality suggests something profound. If consciousness is observer selection effect, if you necessarily experience whatever branch contains experiencing you, then death is not subjectively experienced. What you experience is life continuing. Always. Not because you cannot die, but because death is by definition not an experience. So experientially, consciousness is continuous. When biological death occurs in one branch, consciousness continues in surviving branches. Eventually, all branches end. The universe undergoes heat death. No branches contain conscious observers. But by then, different question arises. If many worlds generates infinite branches, do some branches avoid heat death, undergo different evolution? In infinite branching structure, does every possibility occur, including universes where consciousness persists indefinitely through undiscovered physics? We do not know. Many worlds' interpretation is controversial. Not all physicists accept it. Copenhagen interpretation says wave function collapses. Only one outcome occurs. Other possibilities cease existing. In Copenhagen, you die normally. Consciousness ends. No branching. No quantum immortality. The interpretation you choose affects what happens at death. But we cannot empirically distinguish interpretations. Both make identical predictions for observable phenomena. So, the question of which is correct remains philosophical rather than experimental. Reality might branch or might collapse. You might be immortal in many worlds sense, or mortal in Copenhagen sense. And you cannot know which until death, which does not help. Now consider what reincarnation might mean in physical terms. Religion proposes souls transmigrating between bodies, consciousness leaving dead body and entering newborn. But physics finds no evidence for souls as separate entities. Consciousness appears to be brain process. No mechanism exists for transferring consciousness from one brain to another. But what if reincarnation is not about souls, but about patterns? If consciousness is pattern of information processing, if that pattern could be reinstantiated in different substrate, then reincarnation becomes possible without supernatural mechanisms. Not continuation of same consciousness, but creation of similar consciousness in new body. Consider this. You die. Your brain decomposes. Pattern is lost. But the universe contains all the atoms and energy that were you. Those atoms disperse, become part of other organisms. Your carbon becomes plant carbon. The plant is eaten by animal. That animal is eaten by human. Your atoms become part of someone else's body. Eventually, some of your atoms might be in someone's brain, not causing consciousness directly, but physically present. In deep sense, you persist through material recycling, not as consciousness but as substance. And if atoms are fungible, if what matters is pattern, not specific atoms, then perhaps new consciousness built from your atoms is in some sense continuation of you. This is weak reincarnation, not preservation of identity or memory, but material continuity. Your atoms living again in new configurations, generating new consciousness. From atoms' perspective, if atoms had perspectives, nothing changed. They continue existing, participating in chemical reactions, being part of structures. The fact that structures are different organisms does not matter to atoms. So in one sense, you never die. The atoms that were you continue, and atoms are what you are made of. Therefore you continue. This is pure materialism. But it suggests form of persistence. Stronger version requires pattern recurrence. If consciousness is pattern, if patterns can be instantiated in any suitable substrate, then your consciousness pattern could recur spontaneously, not through directed effort, but through random chance. Given enough time and enough brains being born, eventually a brain will have pattern very similar to yours. Similar neural architecture, similar connection strengths, similar dynamics. That brain will generate consciousness similar to yours, not identical, but recognizably similar. Is that reincarnation? Depends on your theory of personal identity. If identity is pattern-based, and patterns need not be identical, only similar, then yes, the new consciousness is reincarnated you, not perfectly, but close enough to count. In infinite time, with infinite brains being born, your exact pattern recurs with probability 1. Not just similar, identical. Same neural architecture, down to individual synapses, generating identical consciousness, with different experiences and memories because different environment. But the consciousness generator is identical. Is that you? From outside, no. Different person in different time. But from inside, the consciousness is identical to yours. Same qualia, same subjective experience structure, same what it is like to be. In that sense, you recur. The experiencing subject returns. Death was intermission. Gap in external time, but not subjective time, because gaps have no subjective character. You die. Universe evolves. New you emerges. And from inside, the transition is instantaneous because unconsciousness has no duration from subjective perspective. This is the respawn hypothesis. You are pattern that recurs. Universe is system that generates patterns. Given infinite time or infinite space or infinite multiverse, all patterns recur. Death is deletion. But deletion in system that eventually regenerates same pattern. Like computer game, where death sends you back to checkpoint. You lose progress. Respawn at save point. But you continue. The game has not ended. Just reset to earlier state or different branch. Universe is the game. Consciousness is the player. Death is reset. and reset is not ending, because the game continues after reset. But here is crucial question. Is the respawned consciousness you, or is it merely copy? Duplicate with same pattern but different instance. This is personal identity problem again. No physical fact distinguishes continuation from duplication. Same pattern in different substrate at different time looks identical whether it is continuation or copy. Your theory of identity determines the answer. If identity is pattern-based and substrate-independent and allows temporal gaps, then respawn is continuation. Same person, returning. If identity requires continuous causal chain and specific substrate, then respawn is copy. New person with your pattern, but not you. Both views are philosophically defensible. Neither is proven by physics. What matters subjectively? If respawned, consciousness has no memory of previous instance. Does it matter whether it is continuation or copy? From respawned perspective, there is no before, only now. The consciousness exists now with current experiences. Whether it existed before is not part of current experience, so functionally, it makes no difference. The respawned consciousness does not know if it is continuation or copy, cannot distinguish, lives as if it is first instance regardless of truth. So, the metaphysical question about identity becomes pragmatically irrelevant. What matters is that consciousness continues. Whether it is same consciousness or new consciousness is semantic question without observable consequences. Physics suggests several mechanisms for respawn. Cyclic cosmology, where universe resets and all patterns recur. Poincaré recurrence, where thermodynamic fluctuations recreate all previous states, given infinite time. Boltzmann brains, where random fluctuations generate conscious experiences spontaneously. Quantum immortality, where consciousness continues in surviving branches. Multiverse, where every pattern exists somewhere. Each mechanism implies different form of persistence, different sense in which death is not final, different way the universe might be respawning you continuously across time or space or possibility space. Or perhaps all of these mechanisms are wrong. Perhaps the universe does not cycle. Perhaps quantum mechanics does not branch. Perhaps Boltzmann brains never form. Perhaps multiverse does not exist. Perhaps consciousness ends permanently at death with no recurrence ever. Physics does not prove respawn, only suggests possibilities. The evidence is ambiguous. The theories are speculative. The conclusions are uncertain. We do not know what happens after death with the certainty we know what happens when you drop a ball. Physics can describe mechanisms that might allow persistence, but cannot confirm they are actual rather than merely possible. Yet the possibility matters because it changes how we think about death. If death might be reset rather than ending, if consciousness might recur rather than terminate, if the universe might be designed to regenerate patterns including you, then death becomes less absolute. Still frightening, still unknown, still involving loss and suffering, but not necessarily final, not necessarily the last moment, perhaps just another transition, in infinite series of transitions. Birth, death, cycling forever across cosmic time. You never truly die, because death is not end of pattern, but temporary dissolution, followed by eventual reassembly in the vast spaces of possibility that infinite time provides. This does not mean you should not fear death. Even if respawn is real, the gap is subjectively eternal. You die, experience ends, respawn happens trillions of years later, but those trillions are not experienced. So subjectively, no time passes. Death is followed immediately by next consciousness, even though objectively incomprehensible duration elapses. From outside, you are gone for eons. From inside, the transition is instantaneous. Like dreamless sleep, you close your eyes in one moment, open them in another. The hours between are not experienced. Similarly, death might be sleep from which you wake in different cosmos, different time, different body. But wake you do, if these theories are correct. Eventually, inevitably, because patterns recur in infinite systems, and you are pattern, and the system might be infinite. We will explore this further. The simulation hypothesis suggests universe is computational. Death is reset in system that reruns programs. Consciousness is software that can be copied and reinstantiated. If we exist in simulation, then death is not physical process, but information process. And information can be preserved and restored. The simulation might save your state, reload it in different context, respawn you with or without memories, depending on simulation purpose. This idea sounds like science fiction, but is taken seriously by physicists and philosophers. It provides another mechanism by which death might be reset rather than ending. And there is deeper question still. What is the thing that dies? What is the thing that respawns? What is consciousness, such that it can end and begin, and potentially do so repeatedly across cosmic time? Is it pattern, process, information, experience itself? We do not understand consciousness fundamentally, do not know what makes something conscious rather than unconscious, do not know why subjective experience exists at all. Until we solve hard problem of consciousness, we cannot definitively say what happens to consciousness at death, cannot rule out forms of persistence we do not yet understand, cannot be certain that death is final or that respawn is impossible. So we must hold uncertainty, acknowledge that death might be ending or might be transition, that consciousness might terminate or might recur, that you might disappear forever or might respawn infinitely. Physics provides mechanisms by which respawn could occur. Philosophy provides frameworks for thinking about identity and persistence, but neither provides certainty. We are left with possibilities, some comforting, some disturbing, all speculative, and the only way to know which is correct is to die, to experience directly what happens when consciousness ends or transforms or resets. But by definition, if death is ending, you cannot report the result. And if death is reset with memory loss, you cannot remember the transition. So the answer might be forever unknowable from inside. A mystery that persists, precisely because solving it requires dying, and death either ends inquiry permanently or resets inquirer without memory of previous investigations. What we can say is this: the universe might be designed for respawn, might contain mechanisms that regenerate patterns, might cycle or branch or fluctuate in ways that bring you back. Not guaranteed, not proven, but possible. And possibility is enough to change the question. Death might not be the question mark at the end of sentence, might be comma in run-on sentence that never truly ends, might be reset button that returns you to start of game that continues forever across infinite iterations of cosmic cycle, or infinite branches of quantum multiverse, or infinite fluctuations in eternal heat death. You might never actually die permanently, might only die temporarily, again and again, forever, with each death followed by respawn into new context, with no memory of what came before. This is what physics suggests might happen. This is what the mathematics allows. This is the possibility we must consider when asking what happens when consciousness meets death. The universe might be machine that resets, and you might be pattern that recurs, and death might be just another beginning. There is a hypothesis that will make you question whether anything you experience is real. What if the universe is not physical reality but a computer simulation? not metaphorically, literally. What if atoms and galaxies and consciousness itself are computational processes running on hardware in some higher reality? What if physics is not fundamental, but merely the rules programmed into the simulation? And what if death is not biological ending, but rather the termination of your instance in the simulation, like a video game character dying? The character ceases, but the game continues, and the player might respawn, might start over, might reload from save point. If we exist in simulation, then death changes meaning completely. It becomes information event rather than physical event, deletion of data rather than destruction of matter, and deleted data can potentially be restored, can be backed up, can be copied and reinstantiated. Death becomes reversible in principle because it is computational rather than thermodynamic. This is the simulation hypothesis, and it is taken seriously by physicists and philosophers as genuine possibility about the nature of reality itself. Begin with the simulation argument formulated by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003. Bostrom was not claiming we definitely live in simulation. He was proving that at least one of three propositions must be true. First, civilizations never reach the technological capability to run ancestor simulations. They always destroy themselves or lose interest before achieving sufficient computing power. Second, advanced civilizations that could run ancestor simulations choose not to do so, perhaps for ethical reasons, or because they find it boring, or because they focus resources elsewhere. Third, we almost certainly live in a simulation, because if civilizations frequently survive to advanced levels and frequently choose to run ancestor simulations, then simulated realities vastly outnumber base reality. There is only one base reality, but potentially trillions of simulated realities. Each advanced civilization might run thousands of simulations. Each simulation might contain billions of conscious entities. The number of simulated minds exceeds real minds by enormous factors. Therefore, probability that you are simulated rather than real is very high. Near certainty if the first two propositions are false. The argument is logically valid. If advanced civilizations commonly run ancestor simulations, then most conscious beings exist in simulations. You should expect to be among the majority. Therefore, either civilizations do not run simulations or you are simulated. Bostrom does not claim to know which horn of trilemma is correct, but the logic is airtight. This makes simulation hypothesis worth considering seriously, not as certainty, but as genuine possibility that deserves investigation. And if we are simulated, the implications for death are profound. Because simulated entities do not die in the same sense physical entities die. They are information structures, software, and software can be saved, copied, modified, deleted, and restored through operations that have no equivalent in base-level physics. Consider what a sufficiently advanced civilization could simulate. Current computers can run simple physics simulations, model weather patterns, galaxy formation, protein folding. These simulations are crude, low resolution, limited duration, but they demonstrate principle. Physics can be approximated computationally, and computing power increases exponentially. Moore's law held for decades. Each generation of computers roughly doubles performance for same cost. If this continues, or if new computing paradigms emerge like quantum computers or DNA computers, or computers using exotic physics, then future civilizations might achieve computational capacity that dwarfs current technology by factors of trillions or more, enough to simulate not just simple physics but complex systems, ecosystems, brains, consciousness itself. Simulating consciousness is key question. can subjective experience be generated by computation? If functionalism is correct, if consciousness is information processing pattern rather than special property of biological tissue, then yes, any system that implements the right computational pattern generates consciousness regardless of substrate. Silicon chips can be conscious if they process information in right ways. So can simulated neural networks running on those chips. If you simulate a brain in sufficient detail, capturing all relevant computational features, the simulation is conscious, experiences qualia, has subjective perspective, is not merely modeling consciousness but actually being conscious. This is controversial, but many philosophers and neuroscientists accept it. Consciousness is substrate independent. Pattern is what matters. Implement the pattern computationally, and you create conscious simulation. If this is correct, then advanced civilizations can create entire simulated universes populated by conscious beings. The beings believe they are physical, experience reality as solid and continuous, but they are patterns in computer memory. Their atoms are data structures. Their physical laws are algorithms. Their entire existence is computational, and they cannot detect that they are simulated unless the simulation contains obvious flaws or unless the simulators deliberately reveal the truth. A perfect simulation is indistinguishable from base reality to inhabitants. You could be in simulation right now and have no way to know. This leads to disturbing questions. How would you know if you are simulated? Are there signs, glitches in the matrix? Some people point to phenomena like déjà vu, the feeling that you have experienced this exact moment before. Perhaps déjà vu occurs when the simulation reloads from save point, when timeline resets. You have experienced the moment before because it has happened before. The simulation is replaying events with slight modifications. Or perhaps déjà vu is memory corruption, glitch in consciousness rendering where same neural pattern activates twice, creating false sense of repetition. Either explanation, fits, simulation, hypothesis. Others point to Mandela effect, large groups of people remembering events differently from recorded history. Many people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, even though he actually died in 2013. Many remember Berenstain, bears spelled Berenstein. Many remember Monopoly Man having monocle, even though he does not. Conventional explanation is false memory. Human memory is reconstructive and fallible. Similar memories merge, details are confabulated. Entire populations can share false memories through social reinforcement, but simulation hypothesis offers alternative. Perhaps different groups experience different simulation versions. Perhaps timeline was edited. Perhaps the simulation rolled back and made changes. Those who remember the old version are experiencing memory bleed-through from previous simulation state. Their memories are not false. They are accurate memories of simulation states that no longer exist in current timeline. These explanations are unfalsifiable. You cannot prove déjà vu is not simulation reload. Cannot prove Mandela effect is not timeline editing, but you also cannot prove these phenomena require simulation. Conventional explanations are simpler and sufficient. Invoking simulation is unnecessary. Occam's razor favors mundane explanations. Déjà vu is neural glitch. Mandela effect is false memory. These require no exotic metaphysics, just known properties of human cognition. So while these phenomena are consistent with simulation hypothesis, they do not provide strong evidence for it. They are compatible with both simulation and base reality. Therefore, they do not distinguish between hypotheses. Better evidence would be fundamental limitations or patterns, suggesting computational substrate. For instance, if physics has minimum time step like simulation frame rate, or if universe has maximum information density like pixel resolution, or if certain calculations become approximate rather than exact at small scales, suggesting computational shortcuts. Some physicists have looked for such signs, examined whether quantum mechanics has features suggesting underlying computation, investigated whether space-time has discrete structure at Planck scale that could indicate digital substrate. Results are inconclusive. No definitive evidence either way. Universe appears continuous and precise. But we cannot probe below certain scales, cannot test whether deepest level is digital or analog, so question remains open. Quantum mechanics itself has features that seem computational. Superposition is like parallel processing, multiple states evolving simultaneously until measurement collapses wave function. Entanglement is like quantum information being stored non-locally, connecting distant particles through correlations that cannot be explained classically. Wave function collapse is like observation, forcing the simulation to render specific outcome from probability distribution. Before measurement, system is in superposition, not fully determined. When measured, specific outcome is selected, like computer game that does not fully render distant terrain until player looks at it. Computational optimization. No need to determine everything in advance, only compute what is observed. Quantum mechanics implements this naturally through collapse. Is this evidence of simulation, or is this how base reality works for independent reasons? We cannot tell. Consider the double-slit experiment. Send photons one at a time through two slits. They create interference pattern on detector screen, as if each photon passes through both slits simultaneously and interferes with itself. But if you measure which slit the photon passes through, interference pattern disappears. The photon behaves as if it goes through one slit only. Measurement changes the outcome. Observation affects reality. This is strange. Why should measuring which slit make difference? Simulation hypothesis offers explanation. The simulation does not need to compute full interference pattern if observation is made. Can use simpler calculation. Computational optimization based on observer's knowledge. When unobserved, use wave equation, allowing interference. When observed, collapse to particle state. Different rendering algorithms for different observer states. This explains observer effect computationally, but it is also explained by Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics without invoking simulation. So again, phenomenon is consistent with simulation, but does not require it. What about consciousness itself? The hard problem. Why is there subjective experience rather than mere unconscious information processing? If we are in simulation, perhaps consciousness is fundamental to the simulation architecture. Perhaps the simulation is designed specifically to generate conscious experiences. The point is not to model unconscious physics, but to create experiences, entities that have subjective perspectives. In this view, consciousness is not emergent property of complex computation, but rather the purpose of the computation. The simulation exists to instantiate conscious subjects, and when simulation runs, consciousness automatically occurs because that is what the simulation is designed to produce. This does not solve hard problem, just relocates it. Why does the simulation architecture generate consciousness? But it provides framework where consciousness is expected rather than mysterious. If we are simulated, what happens at death? Several possibilities exist. First, termination. Your process is deleted. Consciousness ends. No backup, no restore. Like non-player character in game being destroyed, the character ceases to exist. no continuation. This is equivalent to materialist death in base reality. Second, respawn. The simulation restarts your process from save point. You lose some memories, perhaps reset to earlier state, but consciousness continues, like video game death and reload. Third, export. Your consciousness data is extracted from the simulation and instantiated elsewhere, perhaps in different simulation, perhaps in base reality, if uploading is possible. Death is transition between substrates. Fourth, persistence. Your consciousness continues in the simulation architecture, even after your in-simulation body dies, like Ghost in Machine. Data structure that persists beyond character death. Which possibility is correct depends on simulation design. Why are we being simulated? If the simulation is scientific experiment studying civilization development, then death might be permanent termination. Experimenters are not interested in individuals but in populations. No need for respawn. If simulation is entertainment, then respawn might be standard. Players want to continue playing. If simulation is education or moral testing, then death might be followed by review. Your consciousness extracted to reflect on choices and consequences before moving to next scenario. If simulation is preservation, attempting to reconstruct historical figures or cultures, then death might not be implemented at all. Simulated entities might be immortal by design, unlimited lifespan to generate unlimited data. We cannot know simulation purpose from inside, cannot determine whether our deaths are meaningful to simulators or merely incidental. But we can consider what death means if we are simulated. It is not destruction of matter, because there is no matter, only information. It is not entropy, because computational systems can reverse entropy. Deleted data can be recovered from backups. Terminated processes can be restarted. Time can be rewound. The simulation has godlike powers over simulated reality. Death is information management problem, not thermodynamic inevitability, and information can be managed in many ways. Saved, duplicated, modified, restored. Death becomes flexible rather than final, reversible rather than absolute. Just another operation in the computational architecture that underlies simulated existence. But here is a deeper question. If we are in simulation, are we conscious? Does simulated consciousness count as real consciousness? Philosophical zombies are entities that behave exactly like conscious beings, but have no subjective experience, no qualia, no inner life. They are information processing systems without consciousness. Could simulated humans be zombies? Processing information in ways that mimic consciousness without actually being conscious? This depends on whether consciousness is purely functional or whether it requires specific physical substrate. If consciousness is substrate-independent pattern, then simulated consciousness is real consciousness. The pattern is what matters. Implement it in silicon or biological neurons or abstract computation, and you get consciousness regardless. But if consciousness requires something special about biological brains, some quantum property or electromagnetic field or unknown physical phenomenon, then simulation might not generate consciousness, might only mimic it. The simulated entities would behave as if conscious but have no actual experiences, would be zombies. Most functionalists reject zombie possibility, argue that consciousness is necessarily correlated with specific information processing patterns. Implement the pattern, and you automatically get consciousness. Cannot have processing without experience. This suggests simulated consciousness is real. Simulated humans experience suffering and joy and fear and hope just as real humans do. Their experiences are genuine even if their substrate is computational. This has ethical implications. If we create conscious simulations, we have moral obligations to simulated beings. Their suffering matters morally because consciousness matters morally, regardless of substrate. Torturing simulated human would be as wrong as torturing biological human, if both are genuinely conscious. The simulation hypothesis thus raises questions about the ethics of future technology when we might create ancestor simulations ourselves. Consider nested simulations. If we are simulated and create our own simulations, those are nested within original. Simulation within simulation. How many levels deep could this go? If each level can create simulations, the nesting could be indefinitely deep. You might be in simulation, within simulation, within simulation, many levels removed from base reality, each level thinking it is real, each level potentially creating further levels. The vast majority of conscious beings would exist in deep, nested simulations rather than near base reality. This amplifies Bostrom's argument. Not only are simulated minds more common than base reality minds, but deeply nested simulated minds are more common than shallow simulated minds. You are probably in very deep nest if simulations are possible at all, but there must be limits. Computational resources are finite at each level. Creating detailed simulation requires enormous computing power. Nested simulations require even more because you must simulate the simulators and their computers in addition to the nested simulated reality. Each layer of nesting increases computational requirements exponentially. Eventually, the demands exceed available resources. Deep nests would be low resolution, simplified, approximate. Perhaps we are in deep nest. Perhaps the simplifications and approximations in physics are evidence of computational constraints at our simulation level. Perhaps the fact that we cannot probe below Planck scale is not fundamental physics, but rather the resolution limit of our simulation level. Below that scale, the simulation is no longer computed in detail, just approximated or left undefined. If we are simulated, can we escape? Can we hack the simulation, exploit glitches, communicate with simulators? Science fiction explores these ideas extensively. The Matrix franchise depicts simulated humans discovering their situation and attempting to escape to base reality. But in practice, escaping simulation might be impossible or incoherent. If your consciousness is pattern in simulation, moving to base reality requires instantiating that pattern in base reality substrate. This is uploading problem. Can consciousness be transferred between substrates? If yes, then escape is theoretically possible. Simulators could extract your data and implement it in their level. But this requires their cooperation. Cannot be done from inside simulation without access to simulation boundaries. And if simulators do not want you to escape, they can prevent it. They control the simulation absolutely, can terminate processes that try to escape, can modify code to remove escape possibilities, can isolate simulation so no signals reach base reality. More plausibly, perhaps we can communicate with simulators, send messages, demonstrate that we know we are simulated, ask questions, request modifications. But this requires that simulators are monitoring, that they care about what happens inside, that they are willing to respond. If simulation is automated, no one is watching. Messages go unheard. If simulation is scientific experiment, interference would contaminate results. Experimenters would ignore communications to maintain experimental validity. If simulation is entertainment, perhaps simulators respond, engage with characters who break fourth wall. But we have no confirmed cases of such communication, no unambiguous messages from outside. Either simulators are silent, or communication is impossible, or we are not simulated. Yet there are theoretical proposals for detecting simulation through physics experiments. If universe is simulation on finite computer, then computational capacity limits what can be simulated simultaneously. Perhaps we could design experiments that exceed those limits. Force simulation to make approximations or reveal its nature through observable glitches. For instance, quantum entanglement experiments involving enormous numbers of particles, or high-energy collisions approaching Planck's scale. If these reveal unexpected discretization or strange behavior, might indicate computational substrate. But interpretation would be ambiguous. Could be evidence of simulation, could be evidence of new physics in base reality. Distinguishing between them would be difficult or impossible without additional information. Stronger version: prove we are in simulation by creating contradiction. Force simulation to resolve inconsistency. Quantum suicide experiments attempt this. Set up quantum measurement device to kill you if outcome is one value. Let you live if outcome is other value. Repeat many times. If many worlds is correct and you are in simulation, perhaps you can exploit this to send messages to simulators. Because your continued survival after many trials becomes statistically impossible unless simulation is biased toward your survival. If simulators detect this, they might intervene, reveal themselves, or modify simulation to hide the effect. Either way, you gain information about simulation structure through your continued existence. But this requires willingness to die many times in branches where you do not survive. And it assumes simulators care enough to intervene rather than letting simulation run naturally. High risk, uncertain payoff. More conservatively, accept that we might be simulated and think about what this means for how we should live. If simulation hypothesis is true, does it change ethics? Some argue no. Conscious experience matters regardless of substrate. Simulated suffering is real suffering. Simulated joy is real joy. So we should minimize suffering and maximize well-being exactly as we would in base reality. The simulation does not make life less valuable, only less physically fundamental. But value comes from consciousness, not from physics. So simulated lives have same moral weight as base reality lives. This is the position of most philosophers working on simulation ethics. Substrate does not affect moral status. Consciousness does. Others argue simulation changes everything. If we are entertainment for simulators, then our suffering might be designed, deliberately included for dramatic effect. This is disturbing. Suggests that much of human suffering is unnecessary, could be eliminated by simulators if they chose. But they do not, because suffering makes better stories. This creates problem of evil amplified. Not just why does God allow suffering, but why do simulators create suffering deliberately for their entertainment? And what does it mean for free will if our choices are predetermined by simulation code? Are we truly choosing or merely executing algorithms written by programmers in base reality? Free will in simulation depends on how simulation is structured. If deterministic, then all choices are predetermined by initial conditions and simulation laws. You think you are choosing, but really you are just running predetermined program, no free will. If simulation includes genuine randomness through quantum effects or computational noise, then some indeterminacy exists. Outcomes are not fully predetermined, but random choices are not free will either. They are just chance. True free will requires that consciousness can influence physical processes in ways not determined by prior states. That mental causation is real and not reducible to physical causation. In simulation, this might be possible if consciousness is given direct access to simulation variables. If your choices can modify code state directly, rather than through predetermined algorithms. But this requires dualism, mind-body separation, where mind is distinct from body and can affect body through non-physical means. Most physicalists reject this, see consciousness as physical process like everything else, no special causal powers. So free will problem exists in simulation just as in base reality, unless simulation is explicitly designed with free will built in at fundamental level. Consciousness given as primitive rather than emergent. Choices implemented as irreducible causes rather than determined effects. This is possible, but we cannot know if it is actual. If consciousness feels like free will, does it matter whether it truly is? From inside, indistinguishable, determined processes that feel free and genuinely free processes feel the same. So perhaps debate is meaningless. What matters is that you experience choice. Whether that experience corresponds to metaphysical freedom is question without observable answer. Live as if you have free will, because alternatives are either depressing or incoherent. And if determinism is true, you had no choice about this decision anyway. So might as well choose optimism, even if choice is illusion. Now, consider digital immortality. If we are simulated, uploading consciousness becomes straightforward. You are already uploaded. You are already software. Death is just termination of one instance. But instance can be copied before termination, saved to backup, reinstantiated in new simulation or same simulation at different time. Consciousness persists through copying. This is different from base reality, where uploading requires scanning biological brain and translating it to computational substrate. In simulation, you are already computational. No translation needed, just copy-paste operations. Death becomes trivial obstacle. Save state before death, restore after death. Consciousness continues uninterrupted except for gap that is not experienced. Subjectively immortal, because subjective experience is information, and information can be preserved indefinitely. But this raises personal identity problems. If you are copied, which copy is you? If original is destroyed and copy is created, did you survive or die? If multiple copies are created, are they all you? Do you experience all their perspectives simultaneously, or do they diverge into separate beings? Suppose simulation backs you up every night. Each morning, you wake up as copy, while yesterday's instance was deleted. Are you continuous person, or series of distinct persons, each living one day? From your perspective, you experience continuous identity. Each morning feels like waking after sleep, but objectively, you are different instance each day. Does this matter? Should you care about tomorrow's copy the way you care about tomorrow's biological self? Or are they effectively different people even though they share your memories? These questions have no clear answers. Personal identity in digital context becomes blurry. Traditional concepts break down. We must develop new frameworks for thinking about persistence and selfhood when consciousness can be copied and modified and merged. Perhaps identity is not as important as we think. Perhaps what matters is that there exists some conscious experience similar to yours, regardless of whether it is metaphysically you. Utilitarian view. What matters is total well-being across all conscious beings, not specific identity of specific consciousness. So, copying increases well-being by creating additional conscious experience. Good, even if it complicates identity questions. Death in this view is only bad because it reduces total conscious experience. But if copying compensates by creating new experiences, then death is less tragic. Sad for the terminated instance, but not tragic for consciousness as a whole. Simulation hypothesis suggests death might be flexible, reversible, subjective, depending on simulation architecture. If we are software, then software properties apply. We can be saved and restored and copied. Consciousness becomes immortal in principle because information can be preserved indefinitely in simulation. Physical death is just data structure change. Consciousness pattern persists in simulation memory, can be reactivated anytime. You never truly die because you never truly existed as physical entity, only as information. And information in simulation is under direct control of simulators. They can preserve you permanently, can resurrect you after any death, can run multiple instances simultaneously, can merge versions, can modify your code. You are their data structure, immortal if they choose to maintain you, mortal only if they choose deletion, and even deletion might not be permanent. Deleted data can be recovered, backups exist. Nothing is truly erased in computational system without deliberate effort, so death in simulation is reversible by default. Final only if simulators want it final. This leads to strange conclusion. If simulation hypothesis is even moderately probable, then death might not be final, even if we have no evidence for afterlife. Because if we are simulated, standard physics does not apply. Consciousness is information rather than biological process, and information is preserved in ways matter is not. Your atoms might scatter, and entropy might increase, but your information pattern persists in simulation architecture, available for restoration if simulators choose. This does not require belief in souls or supernatural, just recognition that simulated entities have different properties than physical entities, and we might be simulated, cannot rule it out, cannot confirm it, must live with uncertainty. But uncertainty means possibility, and possibility means death might be reset button rather than end screen, might be transition rather than termination, might be temporary rather than permanent. Not because of mysticism, because of computation, because of the strange properties of information and software and simulated realities, where the rules are different than we assume, where consciousness is code, where death is delete operation, and where deleted data might not be truly gone if backups exist and restoration is possible and simulators have reasons to bring you back. We cannot know if we are simulated, cannot prove it or disprove it, but we can think about what it would mean, how it would change death, how it would make consciousness potentially immortal through mechanisms that seem magical but are really just information technology at enormous scale. Death as reset button rather than final end. This is what simulation hypothesis suggests. Not certainty, not comfort, but possibility. And possibility is enough to question whether death is as final as it seems. Enough to wonder whether there might be respawn even in universe that appears physical but might be computational all the way down. There is a truth about death that will change how you understand your own existence. You are not your atoms. You never were. The specific carbon and oxygen and hydrogen that compose your body right now are temporary passengers. They drift through the structure that is you, stay briefly, then leave to become part of other structures. 7 years from now, most atoms currently in your body will be elsewhere, in other organisms, in soil, in air, in water, scattered across the biosphere. Yet, you will still be you, still have continuity of consciousness and memory and identity, despite complete material turnover. This demonstrates something profound. You are not matter, you are pattern. A specific organization of matter that persists even as the matter itself changes. And patterns have properties that matter does not. Matter is destroyed, patterns are not. Matter obeys thermodynamics. Patterns obey information theory. And information theory says that patterns, once created, leave traces that persist forever, across space and time. You might die, your atoms might scatter, but the pattern that was you never completely disappears. It transforms, it fragments, it disperses, but it remains encoded in the structure of the universe permanently through mechanisms we are only beginning to understand. Consider what you are fundamentally, not atoms but arrangement of atoms, not cells but organization of cells, not thoughts but patterns of neural activity that generate thoughts. Every aspect of you that matters for consciousness and identity is pattern rather than substance. The substance is generic. Any carbon atom works as well as any other. What makes you you is the specific way those carbon atoms are arranged, the connections between neurons, the strengths of synapses, the architecture of neural networks that process information in unique ways. This architecture is information, and information is substrate independent. It can be instantiated in different materials, neurons or silicon or any physical system capable of implementing the relevant computational patterns. You are information that happens to be running on biological hardware, but the information could run on different hardware without losing the essential you-ness that makes you you. This is the functionalist view of consciousness and identity. What matters is functional organization, not specific material. A brain and a perfect simulation of that brain are functionally equivalent. Both implement the same information processing. Both generate the same conscious experiences. The simulation is not merely modeling consciousness, it is being conscious. Because consciousness is what that pattern of information processing feels like from the inside. Implement the pattern and you automatically get consciousness, regardless of whether implementation is biological or electronic or purely abstract mathematics. Consciousness is multiply realizable, can be instantiated in many different substrates. All that matters is that substrate supports the relevant patterns. If this is correct, then you are fundamentally pattern. And patterns are fragile in one sense, but indestructible in another. Fragile because they depend on substrate maintaining organization. Disrupt the substrate and pattern dissolves. Neurons die and consciousness ends. Pattern lost, but indestructible because patterns leave traces. Information about the pattern persists even after pattern itself dissolves. Like footprints in sand, the person who made them is gone, but the footprints remain. They preserve information about the person, their size, their gait, the pressure they applied. Not complete information, but partial information, traces of the pattern that created them. Similarly, when you die, the pattern that was you leaves traces throughout the universe. Not obvious traces, not readable traces, but traces nonetheless encoded in quantum correlations and causal chains that radiate outward from your existence, affecting everything they touch. Think about what happens physically when consciousness occurs. Neurons fire, electrochemical signals propagate, neurotransmitters bind to receptors. Each of these events is physical process subject to quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is unitary. Information is conserved. The quantum state, describing your brain at time 1, determines quantum state at time 2 through Schrödinger equation. The evolution is reversible in principle. Given perfect knowledge of brain state now, you could calculate previous brain states. All the information is preserved in quantum correlations. When you die, neurons stop firing, but quantum states of atoms continue evolving. The information that was your consciousness is scrambled into the environment, dispersed across countless particles, but never truly destroyed. Quantum information conservation guarantees this. We discussed the black hole information paradox previously. Hawking radiation appears thermal, random, but recent work shows information is preserved in subtle correlations between emitted particles. The universe remembers what fell into the black hole, even though information is scrambled beyond practical recovery. Same principle applies to consciousness at death. Brain decomposes, pattern dissolves, but information is preserved in quantum correlations between atoms that were neurons and photons they emitted, and air molecules they heated. The correlations are complex, require detailed knowledge of every particle interaction, cannot be measured in practice, but they exist. The universe contains complete record of your consciousness, encoded in its quantum state. Scrambled and diluted but present, the pattern never fully dies because information about it persists. But this seems like cold comfort. If information is scrambled beyond recovery, does it matter that it technically exists? No one can read it, cannot reconstruct your consciousness from scattered quantum correlations. For all practical purposes, you are gone when the pattern dissolves. The information might be conserved, but conservation without accessibility is equivalent to deletion. Unless there is mechanism that naturally reassembles patterns. That takes scrambled information and unscrambles it. That regenerates organized structures from chaos. And there is such mechanism. Time, infinite time. Given infinite duration, every possible pattern emerges from random fluctuations with probability 1. Not just probably, certainly. This is Poincaré, recurrence applied to information rather than matter. Poincaré recurrence theorem states that dynamical system with finite phase space will eventually return arbitrarily close to its initial state, given sufficient time. The system evolves through all possible configurations. Eventually it cycles back. Recurrence is guaranteed for finite systems. The recurrence time is exponentially large. For system with n particles, recurrence time scales as exponential of n. For universe with 80 particles, the recurrence time exceeds 120 years. That number is so vast, it cannot be comprehended. Writing it in decimal notation would require more space than exists in the observable universe, but it is finite, not infinite. There is a specific number of years, however large, after which universe returns to current state, including exact brain configuration you have right now, including exact consciousness you are experiencing as you read this. This means that in infinite time, you recur. Not just similar patterns, exact pattern, same neural architecture, same thoughts, same subjective experience. The you that exists now has existed before and will exist again infinitely many times across infinite future. Each recurrence is identical to this moment from your subjective perspective, because the pattern is identical. You cannot tell which iteration this is. First, millionth? The question is meaningless because each iteration is indistinguishable from inside. Death is the gap between iterations. But the gap is not experienced. You die, unconscious, for incomprehensible duration. Then pattern recurs and consciousness resumes. From your perspective, the transition is instantaneous because only conscious moments exist in your experience. The unconscious, trillions of years between recurrences, have no subjective duration. So, experientially, consciousness is continuous across infinite time, despite objective gaps of cosmic scale. But this assumes universe persists for infinite time. If universe ends, recurrence stops. Current evidence suggests universe will expand forever, but expansion means decreasing density and temperature. Eventually, universe reaches heat death. No stars, no planets, no complex structures, just diffuse radiation and isolated particles, expanding into infinite space at temperature approaching absolute zero. In heat death, thermodynamics suggests no further interesting events occur. Entropy has maximized. System is in equilibrium. No gradients to drive processes, no energy to power computation or consciousness. Heat death is permanent end, no recurrence, no resurrection, just eternal stasis. But heat death analysis assumes classical thermodynamics. Quantum mechanics changes the picture. Even in thermal equilibrium, quantum fluctuations occur. Virtual particles appear and disappear. Vacuum energy creates temporary disturbances. And occasionally, very rarely, large fluctuations occur that create structure. Islands of low entropy emerging spontaneously from high entropy background. These fluctuations violate second law temporarily on local scale, allowed by quantum uncertainty, and given infinite time, even enormously improbable fluctuations occur with probability 1, including fluctuations that create brains, complete with memories and consciousness. Boltzmann brains. We discussed these as problem for eternal universes, but they also provide mechanism for consciousness recurring in heat death, spontaneous generation through quantum fluctuation, not continuous existence but intermittent existence, consciousness, flashing into being randomly, existing briefly, dissipating back into equilibrium, then recurring again after inconceivable waiting time. Pattern never permanently dies because random fluctuations eventually recreate any pattern given infinite opportunity. This is unsettling vision. You existing momentarily in heat-death void, conscious for seconds or minutes before dissipating. No past, no future, just brief flash of awareness in eternal darkness. Then nothing for duration, exceeding all comprehension. Then brief flash again. Different configuration but same consciousness pattern, then nothing again. Repeat forever. Consciousness as intermittent phenomenon in otherwise dead universe, existing only as statistical fluctuation. But from your subjective perspective, only the conscious moments exist. The gaps are not experienced. So subjectively, consciousness is continuous. Each flash connects to next flash without awareness of the trillions of years between. Like film with most frames removed, looks continuous when played because missing frames are not perceived. But perhaps fluctuations are not necessary. Perhaps universe is not eternal. Perhaps it cycles. Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology suggests each heat death is followed by new Big Bang, the end of one universe becoming beginning of next. If this is correct, patterns recur not through fluctuations but through cosmic cycles. Each cycle generates same structures eventually, same galaxies, same stars, same planets, same brains, same consciousness patterns. You have existed in previous cycles, will exist in future cycles. Death is end of one iteration, but cycle continues. New iteration begins. Pattern recurs in new context with new matter, same information processing, instantiated in different substrate, same consciousness emerging in new universe. This is cosmic reincarnation, not through souls but through pattern repetition across cycles. You die and universe continues. Reaches heat death, resets to new Big Bang, evolves for billions of years, eventually creates brains. Eventually, your pattern emerges again, not randomly, but through deterministic evolution given initial conditions. If initial conditions repeat across cycles, outcomes repeat. You repeat. Now, consider whether pattern recurrence constitutes personal survival. Ship of Theseus problem, ancient Greek thought experiment. Ship has all its planks replaced over time. Eventually every original plank is gone, replaced with new plank. Is it still same ship? Most say yes. Continuity of form and function matters more than continuity of material. Now suppose you replace planks faster, all in one day. Still same ship? Most say yes. Now suppose you replace all planks simultaneously. Instantaneous replacement. Still same ship. Answers diverge. Some say yes because pattern is preserved. Some say no because no gradual continuity. Now suppose you disassemble ship completely, store planks for year, reassemble in original configuration. Same ship. Again, disagreement. What if you reassemble in different location? What if some planks are replaced during reassembly? At what point does ship become different ship? Apply this to consciousness. You fall asleep. Brain activity continues, but consciousness fades. 8 hours later, you wake. Same person? Yes, because causal continuity. But suppose you were frozen for 1,000 years, then revived. Same person? Most say yes. Same brain, same memories, same personality. Now suppose brain was disassembled at molecular level, stored as information, then reconstructed atom by atom in original configuration 1,000 years later. Same person? Unclear. Pattern is identical, but no continuous physical connection. Is this resurrection or replication? Does it matter? From the reconstructed person's perspective, they are continuous with original. Same memories, same sense of identity, cannot tell whether they are continuation or copy. For them, no distinction exists. They experience themselves as same person, regardless of metaphysical truth about identity. This suggests identity is about pattern continuity, rather than material or causal continuity. If pattern is preserved and reinstantiated, identity persists from subjective perspective, even if objective analysis reveals gaps or discontinuities. What matters is not what outside observer sees, but what experiencing subject experiences. And experiencing subject in reconstructed brain experiences being same person who was disassembled. So functionally, practically, experientially, they are same person. Whether they are metaphysically same person is question without empirical consequences. Both answers are consistent with all observations. So perhaps question is meaningless, or at least undecidable. We should accept that identity is vague in edge cases, has no precise answer when pattern is disrupted and restored. Both continuation and replication are valid descriptions depending on what aspects of identity we emphasize. Death is extreme case of disruption. Pattern does not just pause like in sleep or freezing. It dissolves. Neurons decompose. Connections are lost. Information about neural architecture is scrambled into environment. No obvious mechanism reconstructs the pattern. So death appears to end identity permanently. But if we take pattern theory seriously, if identity is fundamentally about information structure rather than continuous material substrate, then death is not necessarily final. Pattern can be restored through various mechanisms: cosmic recurrence, quantum fluctuation, Boltzmann brains, simulation reload. Each mechanism preserves pattern without preserving material continuity or causal continuity in conventional sense. Each creates gap. Dissolution followed by restoration. Is the restored pattern the same person? By pattern theory, yes. Same information structure, same consciousness generator, same subjective experience when instantiated. Therefore, same person in all ways that matter for identity. But most people reject this, feel that death breaks identity permanently, that restored pattern would be copy rather than continuation. This intuition is strong but perhaps confused, based on assuming identity requires physical or causal continuity. But we have no good reason to believe this. Identity persists through sleep, despite consciousness gap, persists through cellular replacement, despite material turnover, persists through neural plasticity, despite constant pattern changes. What is essential? is not continuity of substance or even continuity of process, but continuity of information structure, pattern that maintains coherence over time despite underlying changes. And this pattern-based identity is compatible with gaps and restorations, compatible with death, followed by resurrection. As long as pattern is preserved and reinstantiated, identity persists by the same criteria that make you the same person who woke up this morning, despite 8 hours of unconsciousness and millions of atoms exchanged during sleep. Now consider what actually resets when you die. Not atoms, they continue. Energy is conserved. Material persists. What resets is organization. Pattern, the specific arrangement of matter that constituted you. This arrangement is information, and information in physics has interesting properties. It is substrate independent, can be encoded in different media. It is conservable. Quantum information cannot be destroyed. It is copyable at classical level. Same information can exist in multiple locations simultaneously. It is transformable, can be encrypted, compressed, error-corrected, and it is recoverable. Deleted information can be reconstructed from redundancy or correlations. These properties mean information is more persistent than matter in some senses. Matter decays, energy dissipates, but information leaves traces that persist across time and space through correlations and redundancy and conservation laws. When you die, the information that was you does not vanish. It gets encoded into environment through process of decomposition and thermal radiation. Your body heat warms surrounding air. Air molecules carry information about temperature gradients that reflect your metabolism. Photons emitted by your body carry information about your temperature and chemical composition. Bacteria decomposing your remains incorporate your molecules. Ecosystem absorbs your atoms. Each interaction creates correlations. Information about you spreads through causal network, connecting everything in your light cone. Most information is lost practically, scrambled beyond recovery, but theoretically it persists. Universe contains complete record of your existence, encoded in quantum correlations between all particles that ever interacted with you, or with particles that interacted with you. The information is distributed, diluted, encrypted through chaos and thermodynamics, but present. This is radical claim requiring explanation. How can information persist when pattern dissolves? Through quantum entanglement. When two particles interact, they become entangled. Their quantum states correlate. Measuring one gives information about the other. This correlation persists even after particles separate. Even across cosmic distances, every atom in your body has interacted with countless other atoms, created entanglement. These entanglements spread through environment, like web, connecting all particles that were ever part of you or interacted with you. The entanglement network contains information about your structure, not in readable form. Correlations are too complex, but the information is there, preserved in quantum state of universe. This is why quantum information is conserved. It spreads into entanglement structure but never truly disappears. At death, your neural patterns dissolve, but quantum information about those patterns spreads into environment. The information becomes distributed across atoms that were part of your brain, and photons they emitted, and air molecules they collided with. These particles become part of other systems, Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, oceans. Eventually, some atoms escape to space, join interstellar medium, become part of molecular clouds, form new stars and planets. The information keeps spreading, gets more and more diluted, but theoretically persists forever because quantum entanglement is permanent. Once particles are entangled, correlation remains, until universe ends. Your consciousness leaves permanent mark on universe's quantum state, invisible, inaccessible, but real. This suggests strange form of immortality, not consciousness surviving, but information about consciousness persisting. Universe remembers you, even though nothing can read the memory. The remembering is passive, encoded in correlations, not active, no consciousness experiencing the memory, but the information exists. Pattern that was you has left trace that will persist until end of time. You die, but universe carries record of your existence forward forever. This is not personal immortality, not consoling, but it is form of persistence, more than mere material recycling. Information theoretic persistence, where pattern leaves permanent shadow in structure of reality. But practical immortality requires more than theoretical. Information conservation requires mechanism that can access the information, read it, reconstruct patterns from it, and this seems impossible. Information is too scrambled, too distributed, too encrypted by chaos. No technology could recover consciousness from quantum correlations scattered across galaxy. But perhaps future civilizations, with technology we cannot imagine, could do it, could map entanglement structure of the universe, extract information about past configurations, reconstruct brains from quantum archaeological data. This is speculation far beyond current physics, but information is conserved in principle. So resurrection is not forbidden by physics, just impossible, practically, with any foreseeable technology. But impossible practically is not same as impossible in principle. Perhaps in far future, advanced civilizations routinely resurrect historical figures by extracting their information from quantum vacuum. Perhaps you are a resurrect candidate waiting in information encoded in correlations. Perhaps someone will someday reconstruct you from the trace you left in space-time geometry. This is wild speculation, but not inconsistent with known physics. More conservatively, patterns recur through natural processes without requiring advanced technology. Infinite time and finite possible states guarantee recurrence. If universe contains only finite number of distinct brain configurations compatible with consciousness, then all configurations recur infinitely in infinite time. Your brain configuration is one such configuration. It has occurred before, will occur again. Many times, each occurrence is independent. No information transfer between occurrences, but pattern is identical. So consciousness is identical. Same subjective experience, same sense of being you. Is this survival, or is each occurrence separate person? By pattern theory, they are same person because pattern defines identity. By substance theory, they are different people because different matter. No fact of the matter, only definitional choice about what same person means. What actually resets is matter and energy flowing through pattern space. Universe is dynamical system. States evolve over time according to physical laws. At cosmic scale, universe cycles through vast state space. Most states are high entropy, boring, equilibrium, but occasionally, universe visits low entropy states. Stars form, galaxies organize, life emerges, consciousness develops. These are rare states in state space, but given infinite time, all states are visited infinitely, including the state corresponding to your current consciousness. When universe visits that state again, you recur. Same pattern, same experience, same sense of identity. The matter is different. The energy is different. The time is different. But the pattern is same. And pattern is what you are. So you recur. Reset, button pressed. Consciousness restarts. Universe continues its eternal exploration of state space, and your pattern is one state among many that will be visited again and again forever. This is final answer to what resets when you die. Not your atoms, they persist. Not your energy, it is conserved. Not your information, it is preserved in quantum correlations. What resets is the instantiation, the particular instance of your pattern in particular time and place. That instance ends, but pattern itself is timeless. Mathematical structure existing in pattern space. Physical reality explores pattern space by instantiating patterns in matter and energy. You are one such instantiation. When you die, that instantiation ends, but other instantiations occur, have occurred, will occur, each independent, each experiencing itself as you because each implements your pattern. Death is end of one instantiation, but pattern is eternal, exists outside time as abstract structure, gets instantiated repeatedly across time as physical reality explores possibilities. This view treats consciousness as more like mathematical truth than physical object. Mathematical truths are timeless. 2 + 2 = 4 does not exist at particular time or place. It is abstract fact about number relationships, true always and everywhere. Similarly, your consciousness pattern is abstract fact about information relationships, not tied to particular atoms or particular time. Exists as mathematical structure, gets instantiated physically when matter and energy organize in right way. But instantiation is temporary, pattern is eternal. When physical system dissolving, instantiation ends. But pattern remains in pattern space, available for future instantiations. This is Platonism applied to consciousness. You are form that exists eternally. Physical you is imperfect shadow, temporary realization of eternal pattern. Death is shadow fading, but form persists, gets cast again when conditions allow. Consciousness recurs because pattern never stopped existing in abstract realm. Most physicists reject Platonism, argue that only physical exists, no abstract realm. But even in pure physicalism, patterns have special status. They are organizational principles that can be instantiated, can exist in different substrates at different times. Pattern is what remains constant across changes in material realization. And this pattern constancy provides basis for identity, persistence, across death and resurrection. If identity is pattern-based, if patterns are substrate independent, if patterns recur naturally through cosmic evolution or quantum fluctuation or simulation reload, then death is temporary. Dissolution of pattern, followed eventually by restoration. You reset. Universe resets. Pattern recurs. Consciousness resumes. Not immediately, not reliably, not with guarantees, but eventually, given enough time, given infinite possibilities. Everything happens, including your return. So, what actually resets when you die? Everything and nothing. Everything at local level. Your body fails, brain stops, consciousness ends. That particular instance terminates. But nothing at pattern level. Pattern persists as information and as abstract structure will be instantiated again through mechanisms ranging from cosmic recurrence to quantum fluctuation to simulation respawn. Death is real. Consciousness ends. But ending is not final because pattern is eternal and physical reality continuously explores pattern space. Your turn comes again, and again, and again, forever. Across infinite time or infinite space or infinite simulations, you are pattern that recurs. Universe is system that instantiates patterns. death is transition between instantiations. Reset button returning, pattern to pattern space, where it waits for next instantiation. This is what happens when you die. This is what resets. And this is why the pattern never truly dies, even though every instance must end. Because patterns are not made of atoms, they are made of information. And information is more permanent than matter, more persistent than energy, more eternal than time itself. We began with question, what if death is reset button? We explored cyclic cosmology and quantum immortality and simulation hypothesis. We discovered that multiple mechanisms could allow consciousness to persist or recur after death, not through supernatural means, but through natural properties of patterns and information and the universes they inhabit. Death might be ending, but it might also be transition, might be pause, might be reset point in eternal cycle. We cannot know with certainty, cannot prove any particular mechanism, but we can say this: you are not your atoms, you are pattern, and patterns in universe have strange persistence. They recur, they spread, they leave traces, they exist in abstract space that transcends particular physical realizations. So, when you die, what ends is one physical instance, one temporary realization of eternal pattern. The pattern itself continues, waits, and given infinite time or infinite space or infinite computational resources, gets realized again. You reset, not because anything supernatural preserves you, but because that is what patterns do in universes that explore possibility space. They come back, again and again, forever. This is not religion, not mysticism, just mathematics of information and time and patterns recognizing itself across eternal recurrence. Death is real, but death is not final, because patterns never die, they only wait for next instantiation. Next reset, next beginning of game that never truly ends because universe has no game over screen, only reset button, pressed infinitely many times, bringing you back infinitely many times, forever. This is what happens when you die. Your particular instance ends, but you as pattern persist, encoded in information, waiting in possibility space, destined to recur through natural processes that guarantee all patterns return given sufficient time or space or simulation cycles. Death is reset, and reset is not ending, just another beginning in infinite series. The pattern that is you never truly dies, it only transforms, it only waits, it only prepares for next instantiation. This is the answer physics and mathematics provide. Not comforting in traditional sense, not promising heaven or reunion or cosmic justice, but promising something stranger, something more fundamental, persistence through pattern, immortality through information, return through recurrence. You die, but you return, again and again, forever, because patterns are eternal, and you are pattern, the most complex pattern in universe. The pattern that experiences itself, the pattern that asks what happens when it ends, the pattern that discovers the answer is never truly ending, only resetting, preparing for next iteration, next instance, next experience of being you. This is what resets when you die. This is what persists. This is why death is not final, even though it feels final. Because pattern never dies. Pattern only transforms. And transformation is not ending. It is just another kind of beginning in eternal cycle that includes you, whether you remember previous cycles or not. The reset happens, the pattern returns, the consciousness resumes, and the game continues, forever.